So this is just to kind of help you figure out where you're going to space your pattern on a waist stitch hat. So this is an example that I made my soccer hat for my daughter. The placement of the stitches and how high I wanted the stitches and what positioning I wanted on the hat. So this one, as opposed to something like this, the stitches are lower on the second hat because my lettering is larger, so I wanted to compensate for it while giving the crown of the head without any pattern. So to do this, we're going to use this example. So we have our hello pattern. So what you want to do is, say we start off, I know my pattern has 72 stitches per round, okay? And I know this pattern is 30 stitches across for the pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract it. I'm going to subtract it and I'm going to get 42. So then I have 42 stitches in a hat per round that is not used up by the pattern. So where do you start a pattern? All you do is divide that by 2. So I would start my pattern, my color change, on the 21st stitch of that round is where I would start. And then I would go across, and that would leave you with 21 stitches after until you start the end of the hat. So next question would be is like, how tall? So say for instance, my hat is 20 rows high for my hat, right? I'm gonna have 20 rows from after the brim up to the crown. Where I put my pom-pom is 20 rows. I know 7 of these rows are going to be the pattern. So you're gonna kind of do something similar. So I mean, you're gonna have 13 unused rows for the pattern. So this is where I wanna position my hat. How do I position my hat? So if you want it up higher, what you're going to do is compensate by adding more stitches on the rows on the bottom of unused, or having more stitches on the top if you want it lower. So say I want to have my crown open. I don't want any of the lettering up very high. So what I want to do is kind of start after the first row. So I'm going to start with first row, no pattern. That leaves me, and then I'm going to add in my 7 rows that it's going to take me to have, it's going to use for my pattern, which is going to leave me 12 rows after the pattern for my, to decrease and go up to the crown. So if that's kind of how I figure out when I'm figuring out a hat. So this is like my example for an adult hat. I know with 72 stitches per round with this pattern, I would start on the 21st stitch as my color change stitch. I know that I want my hat on the lower part. I know it's going to take 7 rows for this pattern. So I would start after my first row, do my 7 rows of pattern, and that's going to leave me with 12 rows. So when you want to start figuring out how to decrease it, like say I like to decrease at 40 stitches and I want to do the weave in, pull tight for the pom-pom at 40 stitches. So from there, you're going to figure out, you would start figuring out your decreases from there to make it even to get to the ideal number that you want before you close up your hat. So this one had less than 40 as an example. So hopefully that helps you figure out when you're trying to figure out a hat. The biggest part is going to be what hook size you use for your brim work. If you use single crochet or if you use a half double stitch or a slip stitch for this part. So I use half doubles, and then I will evenly space out the amount of stitches that I need for a pattern. So usually for an adult, I'll have 72 across. For a child, this is a child one. For a child, I might drop it down to 62, up down to 56. So it just depends on my stitch and how tight. I go back and forth between hook sizes. I don't have one I'm dedicated to. Usually my brim will be done in a smaller hook. So if this is 5.5, I'll do this one in a 4.5 or a 5. So hopefully that makes sense. You don't